Man, I'm sweating. It's fucking hot in here, man. I don't have an air conditioning in my room, so it's fucking hot. In other words, I'll say this. In other words, if someone who wasn't the Son of God. So the one reason why my book was so brilliant is because I'm a Son of God, obviously, but at the same time, it's also the best fantasy novel ever written. Xanus is the kind of book that would travel. It would travel all around the world, like Harry Potter did, right? In other words, if someone who wasn't the Son of God wrote Last Hope for Xanus, obviously, Last Hope for Xanus, the news of the book would travel worldwide. That's how amazing my source. It would travel worldwide, and that someone would be a multi-billionaire, and that someone would be a multi-billionaire. That's how good Xanus is, and that someone would be a multi-billionaire. That's how good my book is. So even if I wasn't Son of God, I'd still be a billionaire. Even if I traditionally publish, I would make a good like $1.2 billion or something like that, $1.3 billion, a good $1 to $2 billion if I traditionally publish. Or because I'm self-published, I'm gonna make more money, obviously. So in other words, if someone who wasn't the Son of God wrote the Last of Xanus, the news of the book would travel worldwide, and that someone would be a billionaire, would be a multi-billionaire. That's how good my book is. That's how good Xanus is. In other words, if someone who wasn't the Son of God wrote Last Hope for Xanus, the news of the book would travel worldwide. I'm not kidding around. Because I'm a Son of God and I have the keys, I don't have to worry about my books. Obviously gonna sell billions, obviously. But it's not just a fact that I'm a Son of God. The news of my book is gonna travel worldwide because I have the keys, obviously. At the same time, it's the best fantasy novel ever written. I'll talk about this later on. In other words, if someone who wasn't the Son of God wrote Last Hope for Xanus, the news of the book would travel worldwide. People, so even if that someone had very little followers, let's say if someone had 3,000 followers on Facebook, and that he or she wrote my book, and let's say if only a good 2,000 people bought his or her book, the news of my book would be passed on all over the world, and the guy or woman would end up being a billionaire. The word of mouth would spread worldwide. So the 2,000 people would tell these other people, hey, read this guy's book, and the news of the book would travel worldwide. It's such an amazing, just like the news of Harry Potter travel worldwide. The news of my book is going to travel worldwide because I have the keys and the Son of God, obviously. At the same time, it's the best fantasy novel ever written, and you're looking at crazy buzz from my book. In other words, if someone who wasn't the Son of God wrote Last of His Names, the news of the book would travel worldwide. It'd be all over the news, and that someone would be a multi-billionaire. That's all. That's how what? That's how special Xanus is. Special Last Hope for Xanus is, man. It's a fucking special book, man. It's a unique book. Such a unique story. It's a story like no other. It's a story like no other, man. I hear the noise upstairs. See what I'm saying? It's a story like no other. That's how good my book is, man. You're looking at an amazing book. In other words, if someone who wasn't the Son of God wrote Last Hope for Xanus, the news of the book would travel worldwide, and that someone would be a multi-billionaire. So even if I wasn't the Son of God, I would still be rich. I would have been what? I would have been a multi-billionaire. Because a book like this would travel worldwide, just like a book like Harry Potter traveled word of mouth worldwide. A book like Xanus would travel worldwide. You hear the noise upstairs. Excuse the noise. It's my stepbrother. I don't feel like shutting the camera off, so you're gonna have to excuse the noise if you hear any noise upstairs. Let's see. I'll just make the video through the noise. Anyways, I'll say this. Xanus will have what? Such crazy buzz, obviously. Will have such crazy buzz. What? Fantasy Reddit. I'll say this. Fantasy Reddit. Fantasy Reddit. All the YouTube book nerds. Right? They will what? They will all be what? Be shocked and amazed by my story, obviously. And the internet will explode with about my book. They'll talk about it in coding. The internet will explode about my book, obviously. About my book in coding. They're gonna talk in coding. Because of why, they're not gonna mention my name, obviously. They're gonna talk about my book in coding. Like, it's funny. It's funny, Say, yeah, that was such an amazing book. They're gonna talk about my book, but they're gonna look at something crazy. Xanus will have such crazy buzz. Fantasy Reddit. Fantasy Reddit is a big community of book nerds. You have a good 1.4 million followers on that forum, right? All the YouTube book nerds on YouTube, they will be shocked and amazed by my story, obviously. I always forget to write stuff, man. They'll be shocked and amazed by my story, and the internet will explode about my book, especially Fantasy Reddit. Fantasy Reddit's gonna explode talking about my book because my book is such an amazing story, obviously. And all the book nerds and YouTubers are gonna be talking about my book, as well as the entire world. They're gonna be going crazy over my book. When me and my wife hang out outside, they're gonna be dying for autographs and pictures. Hey, Ivan, I read your book. Your book is such an amazing book. When I say my final 40-day goodbyes, to what? To Elmer Quebec, the people who buy the ebooks, I'm gonna experience fame before I even get that first check. A lot of people are, when I go to the Elmer bar or I go to Ottawa, people are gonna be, hey Ivan, I read some of your book already. Because a lot of people are gonna buy the ebooks. Hey Ivan, I read some of your book already. Your book is fucking amazing. Can I have a picture with you before you peace out? I'm gonna be fucking famous. You're looking at worldwide. So imagine the whole world going crazy with my book, man. Right? The whole world, the English-speaking world, the whole world will be what? Will be going crazy about my book, man. And you're looking at crazier fame for even the movie. The whole world will be going crazy about my book. And even crazier fame for the movie. Look at something fucking crazy. And you guys better fucking enjoy this series while it's hanging. Because once I'm king, I'm not making any videos for you, man. I hope you guys heed my warnings. I don't play around with fucking death, man. You guys are fucking reprobate people. So Xanus will have such crazy buzz as Fantasy Reddit and all the YouTube book nerds. They will be shocked. They will be shocked, obviously. They'll be shocked and amazed by my story, and the internet will explode about my book in coding. Obviously, like, it's funny. You know what I'm saying? This is the best fantasy novel ever written. They're going to talk about my book in coding. This is going to be crazy. The whole world will be going crazy about my book, and even crazier fame for the movie. You're looking at something worldwide. And it's Victoria Justice. Because Victoria Justice didn't write my book, like, people are going to mainly ask me for autographs, obviously. But they're going to want VJ to sign their book, too, because VJ's my special wife, obviously. Because she's my special wife, they're going to be, Ivan, sign my book. VJ, can you sign my book, too? Because VJ's my special wife, obviously. But all the fans who buy the print, they're all gonna want me to sign their books, obviously, when they meet me. And the ones who bought the ebook are gonna want, or they're gonna ask me and my wife for pictures, for a shitload of pictures, and that shit's gonna be trending online. You guys don't feel left out, yeah. You're looking at worldwide fame. When I sell to Vancouver, you're looking at crazy fame. When me and my wife take our 1 year, when we during those 2 months when we plan Skysers, you're looking at crazy fame for my book sales, right? Crazy was for my book. Again, trending pictures of that online. And then when I go on vacation to people in the other countries like Europe, like Switzerland, Japan, they're all gonna ask me to wait for pictures because Master of Xanus is an amazing story. So not only am I gonna make billions because I'm selling God, obviously I have the keys. Last of Xanus is a $1 billion story. It's a $1 billion story, man. I'll say this: Last Hope for Xanus is a $1 billion story. Last Hope for Xanus is a $1 billion story. It's a $1 billion commercial story. It's such an amazing story, man. You'll see what I mean about when you read the book, obviously. Commercial story. Last of Us is a $1 billion, just like Harry Potter is a $1 billion story. Lord of the Rings is a $1 billion story. Game of Thrones is a billion-dollar story, obviously, or a multi-million-dollar story. Twilight is a multi-million-dollar story. Last of Us is a billion-dollar story because it's a unique story. Obviously, there's no story like it. There is no story like it. Like it. Not even Lord of the Rings, man. Not even Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings has a good plot, but it's not as deep as Xanus, obviously. Not even Lord of the Rings. So Last of Xanus is a billion-dollar story. There is no story like it, not even Lord of the Rings, as J.R.R. Tolkien, what? J.R.R. Tolkien did not keep me hooked the way Xanus does, man. I don't mean to be rude. I'm just saying, man. I'm reading Lord of the Rings right now. The book is good, but there's a lot of sections in the book that are very boring. And sometimes I have to force myself to read. Sometimes I have to force myself to read a couple more pages because the info dumps and his dragging on with describing the lands can get repetitive, get very boring. So as J.R.R. Tolkien did not keep me hooked the way Xanus does. Hence why Xanus is a better story, obviously. I don't mean to be rude. I'm just saying, look, man. I read Fellowship of the Ring. I read Two Towers. I'm reading The Return of the King right now. I'll finish Return of the King in a good, in a good month. I'll finish the whole series. I'm reading the book right now. The book is good, obviously, amazing world building, but J.R.R. Tolkien did not keep me hooked the way Xanus does. I went over a few chapters of my book. Oh my god, this book is more interesting than Lord of the Rings. It's a more interesting book than Lord of the Rings. I don't mean to be rude, it just is. Because I have the gift. Tolkien had the gift, obviously. He was gifted, obviously. He was very, very gifted. He has a gift like me. To come up with a story like that and roll like that, you have to be fucking creative. And Tolkien had the gift, obviously. But his book did not keep me hooked the way Xanus does. I don't mean to be rude. Hence why I'm going to be called the modern Tolkien. Right now, George R. R. Martin is known as the American modern Tolkien. Once the world reads Xanus, all the bookers are like, yeah, Ivan America's modern Tolkien. He takes the crown. Because Last of Xanus is the only book that can top Lord of the Rings. No other book can top Lord of the Rings except for Last of Xanus. Right? Let's say this. No fantasy book can top Lord of the Rings, man. That's how good Lord of the Rings is. No book can top Lord of the Rings. There's some people who obviously like Game of Thrones and the Stormlight's Brandon Sanderson's Way of Kings Stormlight series better than Lord of the Rings, but that's very rare. No fantasy book can top Lord of the Rings because what? Because Lord of the Rings is that good, man. Because Lord of the Rings is that good. A little boring, obviously. I'll say this, a little boring, I'll say a little boring. But in terms of world building and depth, languages, that the richness of the world building, nothing, when you read Lord of the Rings, nothing can top that, man. I've yet to see a fantasy novel that can top that, and yet the only book that can top it is Lord of the Rings. No fantasy book can top Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings is that good. A little boring, obviously. I'm going to say a little boring in brackets, but it's that good, obviously, except for Last of Us. Last of Us is the only book that can top Lord of the Rings, because the story is so good. Except for Last Hope for Xanus. Last Hope for Xanus is the only book that can top, except for Last Hope for Xanus. It's the only book that can what? That can top Lord of the Rings, man. I spelled Lord of the Rings. I have the initials wrong there. It's the only book that can top Lord of the Rings because the story is so good. That can top Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings has better world building. I said this in my last video. Lord of the Rings has richer world building than my book, obviously. My world building is pretty rich, but it's not as rich as Lord of the Rings. But the story of Last of Us is better than Lord of the Rings, man. The only book, obviously, that can top Lord of the Rings is Xanus, obviously. You'll see. Right now, you guys think I'm crazy. Once you read my book, you'll finally see what I mean. All those book nerds, those fantasy book nerds who love J.R.R. Tolkien, he's a god of fantasy. You know what I'm saying? He changed the modern fantasy genre. Once they read my book, Last of Us will change the modern fantasy genre. and it will take the number one spot, and it'll beat out Lord of the Rings because it's that good. So no fantasy book. I'm gonna keep saying this. No fantasy book can top Lord of the Rings. I read Lord of the Rings, and I've read other fantasy novels. No book can top that. A pretty boring book in some sections, obviously, but even then, when J.R.R. Tolkien's world, nothing can top that. No fantasy book can top Lord of the Rings because Lord of the Rings is that good. A little boring, but it's good, obviously. Except for Last Sword for Xanus, is the only book that can top Lord of the Rings. Is the only book that can top Lord of the Rings is Xanus. The only book that can top Lord of the Rings is Xanus, because Xanus is that fucking good. I keep saying that. 15 minutes here. And I'm gonna talk about the box office. I'm gonna end this video off with the box office. I'm gonna talk about how Last of Xanus will beat out Avengers, Avatar, Titanic, beat out those movies with ease. All those movies did $2+ billion, and yet Xanus is gonna take out all those movies at the box office easily, man. Right? What was I gonna talk about before? Yeah. There's more to talk about my book, obviously. Right? So Last Hope for Xanus, right? Last Hope for Xanus is what? Is an untouchable. It's an untouchable story. It's an untouchable story. I don't mean to be rude. I don't mean to be cocky. I'm gonna say this. I don't mean to be cocky. Okay, but Last Hope for Xanus is an untouchable story because it's so good. I don't mean to be cocky. I'm gonna have it in brackets here. I don't mean to be cocky, but Last Hope for Xanus is an untouchable story. Untouchable story. Once it is released, no fantasy book. Remember, I'm talking about fantasy here. No fantasy book will be able to beat it. Because it's that good, man. I won't be able to beat it. Because Xanus is that good. I don't mean to be cocky here, World, but Last of Xanus is an untouchable story. Once it is released on Lulu, right? No fantasy book will be able to beat it afterwards. So once the whole world reads my book, they're gonna be shocked with my story. All the book nerds, the booktubers, right? Fantasy read. The whole world's gonna be shocked with my story. That every single fantasy book, like my book is so good that it's going to what? Xanus is so good. It will what? It will change the fantasy genre. It will change the fantasy. Just like Lord of the Rings pretty much changed the fantasy genre. Last of Xanus is going to change the fantasy genre. It's going to change the fantasy genre. And all the fantasy all the famous fantasy. My book is so good that all the famous fantasy book authors are all gonna feel like shit because they're gonna be like, oh my god, I can never write a story like I can never write a story like Xanus. Nothing can top this story. Yeah, let's look at my book. Xanus is so good it will change the fantasy genre, and all the famous fantasy authors. All the famous fantasy authors will feel like shit, obviously, because my book is so fucking good. Because I wrote a better book than all those guys. All those fantasy authors will feel like shit and be like, oh my god, I can't believe, I can never. In other words, my book is so good, I don't mean to be cocky, that Last of Xanus is an untouchable story. Once it is released, no fantasy book will be able to beat it afterwards. Xanus is so good, it will change the fantasy genre. It's going to change the fantasy genre. And all the famous fantasy authors will feel like shit. So guys like Brandon Sanderson, George R. R. Martin, J.K. Rowling, even those guys, Patrick Rufus, all those famous fantasy authors, right? Once they read my book, they're gonna be like, oh my god, I can't see any fantasy story or any fantasy book topping this story. Because Last of Xanus is that good, obviously. It's that good. It's that good of a story, right? My next part, I'm going to talk about the box office. I'm going to talk about how Last of Us Aliens will top out Avengers. I forgot to mention that in my last video, hence why I'm going to talk about that. Right. So I'll say this: even authors like J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling's big, right? George R. Martin. He created Game of Thrones, right? George R. Martin, obviously, right? Brandon Sanderson. These are all famous authors. Authors who wrote amazing books, obviously. Their books are all fucking pop. Their books all sold millions of copies. Even authors like J.K. Rowling, George R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, Patrick Rothfuss, right? You also have Patrick Rothfuss. He's also famous. He wrote Name of the Wind. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm throwing your book out there. Even authors like J.K. Rowling, George R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, Patrick Rothfuss, obviously, once they read my book, they will be shocked, obviously. They'll be shocked and feel like shit. Feel like shit because no fantasy novel will be able. I'm saying this on my camera. No fantasy novel will be able to top Xanus, man. Because Xanus is that good. Will be able to top Xanus. So even authors like J.K. Rowling, George R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, these guys all wrote amazing books, right? J.K. Rowling, George R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, Patrick Rothfuss. Once they read my book, they'll be shocked and feel like shit because no fantasy novel will be able to top Xanus. In other words, all these top authors, once they read my book, they're gonna be like, yeah, I even wrote the best fantasy novel ever. I can't picture anyone coming up with a better story than Last of Us Xanus. Because Last of Us Xanus, because I have the gift, these authors all have the gift too, obviously, but because I'm gifted, obviously, I wrote such an amazing story that no story can top it. It's such an amazing story. Just like no movie can top, pretty much no movie trilogy can top what the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because Lord of the Rings trilogy is that good, except for Last of Us Xanus. Last of Us Xanus, if it's done right, will be a better trilogy than Lord of the Rings. Just like pretty much no movie trilogy can top Lord of the Rings. I've yet to see a movie trilogy that can beat Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings is that good. The only movie trilogy that can beat Lord of the Rings is Last of Us Xanus if it's done right, and a lot of money's put into it. And even authors like J.K. Rowling, George R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, and Patrick Rothfuss, once they read my book, they'll be shocked and feel like shit, obviously. They're going to feel like shit. Because they're going to be like, oh my god, I even wrote a better book than my fantasy novel, obviously. And they know that, and once they read my book, they will know that no fantasy novel will be able to top Xanus. Because Xanus is that fucking good, man. Xanus is that fucking good. What? They will what? They will say, I cannot picture another author, obviously, writing a better fantasy novel, because Xanus is that fucking good, man. Just like right now, you can't picture any book topping Lord of the Rings. Because Lord of the Rings is the cream of the crop. Nothing can top Lord of the Rings except for Xanus, obviously. Once the world reads Xanus will beat Lord of the Rings, obviously. It'll take the #1 spot. And all these authors like J.K. Rowling, George R. Martin, these are all famous rich people, man. J.K. Rowling, George R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, Patrick Rothfuss. Once they read my book, they will be shocked and feel like shit. They're going to feel like shit. Just like those actors are going to feel like shit when me and my wife start the process of our organization because they're left out. All these authors are gonna feel like shit because Ivan wrote a better book than all their books. Obviously, he wrote a book even better than Lord of the Rings, and they will all say, I cannot picture another author writing a better fantasy novel than Last of Us Xanus. Because Last of Us Xanus is that good. It's that fucking good, man. It's that good. See what I'm saying here? Hence why you're looking at crazy buzz. You're looking at something crazier than even what? Something crazier than even Harry Potter. Harry Potter had crazy buzz at the dawn of the 21st century. Lord of the Rings had crazy. The movies had crazy buzz. The movies and books had crazy buzz. Were crazy buzz for Harry Potter. The movies and books were crazy buzz for Lord of the Rings. For the movies and books, you're also looking at crazy buzz for what? For Last of Us. You're looking at crazy buzz for the book, and even crazier buzz for the movie as I'm bringing the world to life and I'm acting in the movie. Me and my wife are acting in the movie, and she's looking at even crazier buzz for the movie, obviously, as I'm bringing the world to life. As in my book, I give very vague descriptions of the lands. I give a few details, but I give very vague descriptions. I focus more on the plot and the characters, whereas J.R.R. Tolkien focuses more on the detail and the world building, less on the characters. As J.R.R. Tolkien's characters feel a bit dull in Lord of the Rings. Like his character development isn't the greatest, but his world building and attention to detail for the lands is fucking amazing. Whereas I'm the opposite. My world building is good, but it's not that deep. My details of the world building is not the greatest, but my character development and my plot and my story is top notch. Obviously. Right? That's how good Zane is. You're looking at something crazy. All those authors like J.K. Rowling, Brandon Sanderson. By the way, to all you guys who haven't read Brandon Sanderson, I recommend you pick up his book, Way of Kings. He also has a YouTube channel called Brandon Sanderson. You can watch him on YouTube. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm on your YouTube channel. For all those who do not know Patrick Rothfuss wrote Name of the Wind. I recommend you go pick up his book, Name of the Wind. I heard some great things about that book. And you guys all know George R. R. Martin. That George R. R. Martin is a Game of Thrones author. The Game of Thrones was adapted into what? Into a television show for 8 seasons. For all those who haven't read George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones book, you can pick up his 5-book series, I think. And to all those who haven't read Harry Potter, you can pick up J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, as well as her Fantastic Beasts books if you want to. Yeah, you're welcome, guys. I'm promoting your fucking book out there. That's how nice I am. Obviously, right? So let's talk about Lord of the Rings and Xanus for a bit. Not that I'll talk about the box office. Okay. Lord of the Rings is what? Is more what? Is more focused on what? On world building. World building and details, obviously. Whereas Last Hope for Xanus is not focused on world building. I have world building in my book, but I focus more on character development and the plot. So Lord of the Rings is more focused on world building and details, less on character development, because the characters in Lord of the Rings are not developed that well. Less on character development, obviously. As the characters in Lord of the Rings are a bit dull, obviously. Last Hope for Xanus. Right, so Lord of the Rings, Last Hope for Xanus is more focused on what? On character development. And plot. Whereas Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings is more focused on the world building and details. World building and details and plot too. Because Lord of the Rings and plot. Whereas Last of Us is more focused on character development and plot, less on world building. I have amazing world building. My world building, I focus less on world building. I give very what? Less on world building what? Less on world building and details, obviously. Excuse the noise if you hear the noise upstairs. Right? You can hear the fusses. Excuse the noise. So Lord of the Rings is more focused on world building and details and plot, less on character development, as the characters in Lord of the Rings are not developed that well. No offense. J.R.R. Tolkien is a master of world building, but in terms of character development, he isn't the best, obviously. Whereas me, I'm the opposite. I'm a great world builder, but I'm more known for my character development and plot, less on world building and details, obviously. So Lord of the Rings is more focused on world building and details and the plot, obviously, less on character development. Whereas Last of Us is more focused on character development and plot, less on world building and details, as I give very what? I give vague descriptions of the lands, obviously. I give vague details and descriptions. The reason why I do that because I know that if you spend time describing lands on stuff, your book can get very boring. And hence why I focus more on the characters and the plot. And if you do that, I don't tell. Hence why my book is fucking interesting, obviously. I give vague details and descriptions in my book about the lands and all stuff. Very vague descriptions. I give very little detail about how Xanus looks like, how Barak looks like. I just mentioned a few details, and I focus more on the characters and the plot. So I give vague details and descriptions in my book about the what? About the lands, obviously, lands and details, right? Whereas J.R. Tolkien has what? A lot of info dumps, man. A lot of what? Of info dumps. So much you even forget a lot of the what? A lot of the lands, because he has so much stuff going on, man. J.R. Tolkien has what? Has a lot of info dumps. So much you even forget a lot of what? The lands he mentioned. You forget a lot of the lands, characters, because he has so much what? Info dumps. Which can be boring, obviously. See what I'm saying here? So even though Lord of the Rings is an amazing series, the books are pretty boring. I don't mean to be rude, man. J.R. Tolkien's a legend. His book's amazing, but read the books. There's sometimes I have to force myself to read just an extra 10 pages because he drags on describing the lands and the characters, all these characters. He has so much lands and so much characters, I forget half the lands and I forget half the characters he mentioned. Hence, for Lord of the Rings, for me to really understand the book, I have to read it multiple times. Because the book is kind of, for me personally, it's a difficult book to follow because there's so much information going on in the book, so much land, so much this, so much that. Whereas my book is easy to follow because I focus more on the character development and the plot, less on world details. Hence why Xanus is a very easy story. It's a complex plot, obviously. You'll see, it's simple and complex at the same time. Even though my book is simple, it's simple and complex at the same time, but it's easier to follow, obviously. I'll show my camera off here.